All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about AP World. We're going to be talking a little bit about state building in post classical Africa. So, without further ado, let's go dunk on AP. Africa, especially as we're talking about today, is a lot of the places that aren't as dominated by Dar al Islam. Okay, so we're talking a little more about Sub Saharan African today, or maybe Western Africa and Eastern Africa today. So, today, I want to start with the Bantu people. Now, the Bantu people begin their migration into Africa at a time we don't even know, like way BC, but they'll stop their migration in Africa because they've made it all the way down to the bottom in South Africa by about AD 500. They spread agriculture and iron metallurgy shapes through sub-Saharan Africa. A big thing for the Bantu people is the cultivation of bananas. Of course, that's going to be a huge food source. They were really well adapted to the sub-Saharan African climate. The bananas were, and they greatly increased the food supply. So Islam was spreading at this time, but some areas were resisting in sub-Saharan Africa. So trans-Saharan trade and Swahili coast trade is thriving. And women have more important roles in society than most other areas with the Bantu people. So the Bantu were close knit communities where they would trace their ancestry through their mothers, not their fathers. They believed in many spirits inhabiting the world, but only one God. They were a storytelling people who created masks and sculpted figures to represent dead ancestors. Now, in general, with almost all of these African societies we're going to talk about today, they're a little bit more decentralized than Asian and European societies. That's a big thing you need to know about sub Saharan Africa in the post classical age. It's a lot more decentralized. So, with kin based networks, families govern themselves with a male head called a chief to mediate conflicts and deal with neighboring groups. As the population of the Bantu grows after the year 1000, you're going to see more increased competition among tribes. Now, the Hausa kingdoms, they formed in modern day Nigeria before the year 1000. They established some prosperous city states, and they also benefit from the trans Saharan trade. And remember, whenever you're talking about the trans Saharan trade, you're usually talking about trade with Muslims. The Hausa had 7 kin based kingdoms that specialized in specific areas. So, the major African kingdoms to know. Let's start with the Kingdom of Ghana. Now, the Kingdom of Ghana is not in exactly the same place as it was when we talk about the modern day country of Ghana. But this was between the Sahara and the West African coasts. They sold gold and ivory to Muslim traders for salt, copper, cloth, and tools. They had a centralized government led by a king in the capital city of Kumbai Saleh. They were weakened by wars in the 12th century. Then you had the Kingdom of Mali, which was a trading society founded around the same time that you start to see Ghana decline, potentially founded by Muslims. They established trade with Muslim merchants in North Africa. Then you've got Zimbabwe, which is actually the Bantu word for dwellings. It became the name of the most powerful of all of the East African kingdoms from the 12th to the 15th century. Um, they gained prosperity through agriculture, grazing, trade, and gold. They had rich gold fields and traded on the Indian Ocean trade. The capital city was called the Great Zimbabwe, but overgrazing of the land hurts the environment and leaves the city abandoned by the 15th century. So then you've got Ethiopia, which is the only Christian kingdom that we're going to be talking about today, is like a little Christian island in East Africa, but it did combine aspects of local religion with Christianity. So those are your African kingdoms. Now, as far as women's roles, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, in the post-classical time period, communities were patriarchal, of course, led by the fathers, led by men, but women were still major players. They were gatherers and farmers in many cases. But even with the introduction of Islam, women didn't wear the hijab, since it may have been considered a cultural tradition in the Middle East, and not a religious requirement. Then you've got the griots, who were a big part of sub-Saharan African culture. They were storytellers who possessed encyclopedic knowledge of family lineages and other info. Women could occupy this job as well as men. They were both venerated and feared. They said they could sing to your successes or sing your downfall. So people identified first in sub-Saharan culture as a member of a tribe or family, and the age of a person was a significant social marker. Music, stories, and visual arts were major cultural markers as well. Now, of course, we do see the big growth in population in Africa. With that big growth, you do get the slave trade. Now, the slave trade is something that I know in America, we tend to look at through the American lens, but understand that the slave trade was happening a long time before what we know as the transatlantic slave trade. So in sub Saharan Africa, private property did not exist. So the accumulation of slaves showed social status. It was practiced since ancient times. Most slaves were captives of war between tribes. They were debtors or suspected witches or criminals. They were used principally in agricultural labor. The Islamic societies, in particular, made great use of sub Saharan African slaves. Slave trade increases with the rise in Muslim demand in trans Saharan and Indian Ocean trade. Africa replaces Eastern Europe as the main supplier of slaves, and this leads to a ton of slave raids and conflicts. So there are three different types of slave labor: chattel slavery, domestic, and debt bondage. So, chattel slavery, slaves are the legal property of the owner. Domestic, slaves serve as cooks, cleaners, or other household workers. And then with debt bondage, people became slaves, sometimes through mutual agreement to repay a debt. And of course, there is overlap between these three in a lot of cases. So these are the main things that you need to know about sub Saharan Africa in the post classical age. Hope you guys enjoyed Duncan on History. See you next time.